On October 14, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was confronted with a devastating decision. He could accept what the regime called an honourable death, or he could stand trial for treason, a public disgrace that would not only ruin his name, but also put his family in danger. To the German people, the announcement was simple. Rommel had died from complications caused by earlier war wounds, but that official story hid a much darker reality. For years, Rommel had been celebrated as one of Germany's most brilliant commanders, earning the nickname the Desert Fox for his campaigns in North Africa. Yet behind the praise and propaganda, his faith in Hitler was beginning to fade. He had seen the Führer's military miscalculations up close. He had also become aware of the crimes committed by the Nazi regime. By 1944, suspicion surrounded him. Because of his indirect connections to the failed July 20th assassination attempt against Hitler, he was accused of betrayal. Now the man once admired as Hitler's favourite general found himself trapped between loyalty and conscience. This is the story of how Erwin Rommel, a symbol of Nazi military success, became linked to a resistance movement against the very system he had once fought to defend. In the quiet Alpine region of southern Germany, far from the traditional centres of military power, the future Field Marshal Erwin Rommel began his journey. He was not born into a long line of officers or aristocrats. His father was a mathematics teacher, and no one in his family had worn a uniform before him. In fact, as a young man, Rommel briefly considered becoming an engineer. His talent for warfare first became clear during the First World War. Serving as a young lieutenant on several fronts, Rommel proved himself adaptable and daring. His most famous early achievement came in 1917 at the Battle of Caporetto. Moving through narrow mountain paths under heavy fog, he led a small detachment behind Italian lines. With speed and surprise on his side, he seized a key enemy position and captured more than 9,000 prisoners, all while suffering minimal losses. For this action, he received Germany's highest military decoration at the time, the Pour le Mérite, an exceptional honour for someone of his relatively low rank. Rommel's success was built on bold manoeuvring and infiltration tactics. Rather than relying on slow traditional advances, he favoured rapid movement and unexpected strikes. After the war, he put his experiences into writing. His book Infantry Attacks analysed modern combat in practical terms and eventually drew the attention of Adolf Hitler. When the Second World War began, Rommel briefly commanded Hitler's security detail during the invasion of Poland, but he wanted frontline command. Soon he was given leadership of the 7th Panzer Division during the campaign in France. There his unit moved with astonishing speed. In just 5 days, his armoured forces pushed more than 200 miles, reaching the English Channel and surprising not only the Allies but also parts of the German High Command. Rommel often directed operations from the front, sometimes riding in the leading tank, relying on instinct and quick decisions rather than strict adherence to protocol. In 1941, Hitler sent him to North Africa. Despite limited supplies and equipment, Rommel achieved a series of dramatic victories against British forces. One of the most significant came in 1942 with the capture of Tobruk, where around 35,000 Allied troops were taken prisoner along with valuable supplies. These successes earned him widespread recognition. Even British soldiers referred to him as the Desert Fox, acknowledging his skill as an opponent. The Allies understood they were facing an unusual situation. Millions of young who had grown up under dictatorship shaped by propaganda and strict ideological training. In the Western occupied zones, the response focused mainly on education rather than punishment. All Nazi-linked youth organisations were shut down and were encouraged under church leadership or local authorities. The aim was to introduce democratic value and personal responsibility. Teachers, clergy and but conditions on the battlefield were changing. Supplies were shrinking, Allied forces were growing stronger and victories became harder to achieve. Rommel began to notice the gap between military reality and Hitler's strategic decisions. The turning point came at El Alamein in late 1942. Facing overwhelming British numbers and firepower, Rommel understood that a withdrawal was necessary to save his troops. Hitler's strict order to hold the line at all costs left no room for retreat. As losses mounted, Rommel saw soldiers dying in what he believed was avoidable destruction. A refusal to pull back turned the front into a scene of heavy casualties. For a commander who valued the lives of his men above political slogans, this was deeply troubling. The disaster at El Alamein marked a shift in his thinking. In private letters to his wife, Rommel expressed growing concern about the direction of the war and the consequences of Hitler's leadership. These personal reflections show the beginning of a serious internal struggle. By 1943, the once energetic Desert Fox looked worn down. Photographs from that period reveal a man visibly aged by constant pressure. The strain of command had affected him physically and emotionally. What had started as disagreements over strategy gradually developed into deeper doubts, not only about how the war was being fought, but about the moral cost of continuing it. Throughout the war, Hitler repeatedly insisted on launching new offensives, even when supply lines across the Mediterranean were being crippled by Allied ships and aircraft. Fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements often failed to reach North Africa in sufficient quantities. For Rommel, who understood that logistics determined victory or defeat, this disconnect from reality was deeply troubling. During the North African campaign, Rommel became aware of brutal actions carried out by SS units. These reports clashed with his belief that war, however violent, should be fought according to professional military standards. He once described his ideal as war without hate. While he was still a loyal officer of the German army, evidence suggests he preferred conventional military conduct over the ideological extremism driving the Nazi leadership. One revealing episode highlighted the growing divide between him and Hitler. Rommel suggested appointing a Jewish individual to a regional administrative role, hoping to counter international accusations about Germany's treatment of Jews. Hitler dismissed the idea outright, reportedly telling him, "Dear Rommel, you understand nothing about my thinking." The exchange exposed how far apart their perspectives had become, one rooted in traditional military reasoning, the other in racial ideology. By 1944, Rommel had been reassigned to oversee the strengthening of the Atlantic Wall, Germany's defensive line against an expected Allied invasion in Western Europe. Here, disagreements with Hitler intensified. They clashed over how to respond to a landing. Rommel argued for strong defences directly at the coast, while Hitler favoured holding armoured reserves farther inland. While he inspected fortifications along the French coast, another shift was quietly unfolding. In May 1944, only weeks before D-Day, a discreet meeting took place that would later link Rommel to the most serious attempt on Hitler's life. By that time, a secret resistance network had formed within Germany. Senior officers, civil servants, and intellectuals who believed Hitler was destroying the country operated in constant danger. Discovery meant torture and execution. Rommel's chief of staff, Hans Speidel, served as a key connection between the field marshal and members of this underground movement. Through Speidel, Rommel renewed contact with General Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, the military governor of occupied France and a central conspirator. For decades, historians debated how deeply Rommel was involved. In 2018, historian Christian Schweitzer uncovered an eyewitness account by Rudolf Hartmann that shed new light on the matter. Hartmann described a private meeting in mid-May 1944 at the home of Colonel Karl Richard Kossmann. Photographs from that gathering show Rommel seated with known resistance figures. The discussion, held in strict secrecy, reportedly included conversations about removing Hitler from power. These findings strengthened the argument that Rommel was more than a passive observer. Yet his approach differed from many of the conspirators. While some believed assassination was the only realistic option, Rommel favoured arresting Hitler and putting him on trial. He feared that killing him outright might plunge Germany into civil war. After the war, his widow maintained that he supported removing Hitler legally rather than through murder. In reality, carrying out an arrest was almost impossible. Hitler was constantly surrounded by loyal SS guards, creating layers of security that few could penetrate. As a result, the resistance concluded that assassination was their only viable path. Events soon took an unexpected turn. On July 17, 1944, just 3 days before the planned bombing, Rommel's staff car was attacked by an Allied fighter aircraft while returning from a visit to the ISS Panzer Corps headquarters. The strafing left him with severe head injuries, including multiple skull fractures. At first, his condition appeared fatal. Incapacitated and recovering, he played no active role when Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb at Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters on July 20th. When the assassination attempt failed, the Gestapo launched a sweeping investigation. Arrested conspirators were tortured, and under brutal interrogations several names surfaced, including Rommel's. Particularly damaging was the condition of Stülpnagel. After attempting suicide and suffering gunshot wounds, he reportedly repeated Rommel's name while in a delirious state. This created a direct association between Germany's most celebrated general and the plot. Hitler now faced a difficult situation. Rommel was not just another officer, he was a national hero, admired even by some Allied commanders. A public trial risked exposing divisions within the German military and damaging morale at a critical stage of the war. At the same time, allowing him to go unpunished was unthinkable. To handle the situation, Hitler created a special court of military honor made up of Germany's highest-ranking officers. Among them were Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, and Colonel General Heinz Guderian. By involving the top leadership of the Wehrmacht in the decision, Hitler ensured that responsibility would be shared. On October 14, 1944, Generals Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maisel arrived without warning at Rommel's home in Herlingen. They carried a message directly from Hitler. Rommel was given three options: stand before the People's Court in a public trial that would almost certainly end in execution and punishment for his family, personally appeal to Hitler, or take what the regime described as an honourable path by ending his own life. In a final conversation with his wife Lucy and his son, Rommel spoke calmly about the reality before him. He explained that because of his service in North Africa, he had been offered the chance to die quietly by poison. The cyanide capsule, he said, would act within seconds. If he accepted, his family would be spared arrest and retaliation. The man who had endured years of desert warfare now faced a private and inescapable decision. After saying his goodbyes, Rommel stepped outside and entered the general's car. It was a short drive. Within minutes, he was dead. What followed was carefully staged. The regime announced that Rommel had died from complications related to his earlier head injuries. A state funeral was organised with full military honours. Hitler even declared a national day of mourning. The ceremony reinforced the illusion of unity and avoided uncomfortable questions about why one of Germany's most celebrated commanders had suddenly passed away. After the war, Rommel's image evolved again. Allied leaders, including Winston Churchill, often portrayed him as a professional soldier rather than a committed Nazi, contributing to the narrative of Rommel as a good German. This interpretation helped shape post-war discussions about responsibility and reconciliation. But Rommel's story reaches beyond battlefield strategy. It raises deeper questions about loyalty, conscience, and the choices individuals make under authoritarian rule. Resistance is rarely one dramatic act. More often it develops through gradual decisions and inner conflict. Political philosopher Michael Walzer once wrote that the duty to resist tyranny does not belong to one era alone. Similarly, General Ludwig Beck, another figure in the opposition, stated that death could be preferable to a life without honour. So how should Rommel be remembered? Was he a genuine opponent of Hitler, or a commander navigating the collapse of a regime he once served? Share your thoughts in the comments.